Well, good morning, sir.
Good afternoon.
Yes, or
So I
whatever
should
your
say good morning. You should say good afternoon. It's
whatever
very
your time
confusing.
zone
Yeah.
dictates.
Yes,
How are you?
exactly. Yeah, fine, thank you. Yes, just trying to get used to the concept of sunshine, and actually, it's warm enough to actually want to go outside, which is
Yes.
the first time in the
Well,
year.
that's miraculous, isn't it?
Yeah, it's nice. I really like it. And also, just last week I had a haircut, and next week I'm going to have a jab. I'm going to be vaccinated, which seems kind of backwards when you think
Oh,
about it.
yeah.
So British policy is not entirely integrated, but at least they seem to be actually getting on top of the
There you
virus, at
go.
least for the moment.
Yeah. All right. Well, you'll be all set up. You'll have your vaccine shot and your haircut, so you'll be ready
Yeah,
to go.
yeah,
Well,
absolutely
if
ready to
you're
leave the
just
house.
jumping in with us right now, we are going to kick off a podcast recording in just a couple minutes. We do this every Sunday morning. We're broadcasting into our typical groups right now, but we've added a special one this week, and that is for the fine folks who are part of our 30-day replens challenge. It's something that we kicked off on the 12th, I guess it was last Monday, so 6 days ago. And we've had a great time, 630 people in it or something like that. And so it's all about a new sourcing strategy for replenishable items on Amazon. And so you're going to be a guest speaker here in the weeks ahead on the cash conversion cycle, something that sounds intriguing and mesmerizing and all that. So that'll be a fun session that we'll do. But we thought we'd also do today's podcast and share it into the 30-day challenge replens, challenge group. So if you're watching us there, welcome to the podcast. My amazing co-host is Michael Veazey in London. And so we're going to start a recording in just a minute. This is going to be a fun one, man. We've never done a podcast like this before.
No, it's going to be a bit of a smorgasbord, so a little bit different from the usual, rather more structural, I think very structured at the big level, as we decided to. And I think that I'm really pleased with the fact that we have mostly decided to focus on a more unified, less kind of mentally fracturing way of podcasting.
Mm-hmm.
But this is going to be a bit more of a smorgasbord. So there's going to be a lot of stuff, some of which will be irrelevant to any given listener. But I think that that out of the 10 concepts and mostly 10 guests that I'm going to refer to, the experts I've had on the podcast for 5 years now, maybe even 6, I lose track. And I think there's going to be something for everyone here. And what I'd suggest is that you follow up on the ones that interest you by simply going to the Amazing FBA podcast and finding out more in more depth. And one thing I would say is this, that broadly speaking, I've tried to pull this together quickly, which actually is good and bad. The good thing is that when you work from memory, and the stuff that's really stuck in your head is probably the concept that's really influenced you, and there's something very striking about it to you, which I think is the good thing. The downside is I may have misremembered what people have said and actually be misquoting them. So go and listen to the originals if you want to actually know what some of the guests that I'm going to refer to actually said.
So this is going to be a listicle type show where we're going to show the top 10 or 10 at least powerful Amazon selling concepts and business concepts from your over 500 podcast interviews.
Yeah, I don't even know how many it is. That is a lot. I mean, it's 500 episodes, many of which in the early days were me solo, and it's been increasingly expert focused and interview focused. So yeah, I guess I must have several hundred episodes of interviews at least. Yeah, it's a lot.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, if you're watching with us live right now in one of the groups that we manage or channels, then feel free to leave a comment. We can see your comments. Happy to weave those into the show. So without further ado, why don't we kick this thing off? I'll start the official podcast recording and jump into the episode. Sound all right?
Sounds great. Yes, let's do this thing.
All right. I'll kick it off for us. Here we go. Welcome to the E-Commerce Leader Podcast. In this fun episode, Michael is going to break down 10 powerful interviews he's done with top Amazon experts. Now, Michael, you've done over 500 episodes now on the Amazing FBA podcast. That's gone on for years. When did you start? Years ago, I suppose, huh?
I even lose track. I think it's 2015, September 2015 that it really kicked off. And I think I did my first sort of attempt in July just to see if it will work. So yeah, I do, however long that is, I lose track.
And you've interviewed some fantastic people over the years.
Oh yeah.
And
for sure.
Tremendous, expertise, and your show is fantastic. If you search for anything related to Amazon selling or third-party selling or e-commerce, the Amazing FBA podcast pops up on all the players. top of the lists everywhere, and so it's really fun to be able to kind of mine the depths of the episodes, really kind of dig through what you've done. So we're just going to make this a listicle where we go down your list of 10 powerful business concepts. So let's jump into it. Why don't you share your first podcast guest? I guess you should give us the reference number, what episode it was in the Amazing FBA, and so people can go check them out as they get their interests piqued as you share about the ideas. Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, just to slightly confuse the issue, that I have a parallel podcast called the 10K Collective podcast, which is more geared to the needs of the 6, 7, and 8-figure Amazon sellers. Amazing FBA is very broad. Yeah. Broadly speaking, though, it is more geared to people who are earlier stages. So some of the stuff has got different reference numbers because it's in 2 series. One is the sort of general Amazing FBA series, which goes from 0 to 500 or whatever it is now. And the other one is series 1, which is the 10K Collective podcast. So maybe we might skip the numbers and just ask people to put into the Find Amazing FBA podcast and then search by guest name is what I would suggest.
Okay, great.
It's going to be easier.
Okay. Let's jump into it. What's your first expert and the concept they shared, and why was it so powerful?
Great. So the first couple of people that I had on as a pair of people, actually, Jason Boyce and Rick Cesari. Jason, both real powerhouses in their respective fields. Jason Boyce sold on Amazon for, I think, about 17 years, now runs a really, really good agency. He got to 8 figures in multiple years while he was selling with his brothers. Rick Cesari was behind things like the Lean Green grilling machine and GoPro camera and Sonicare toothbrush. So he's actually got several products to over $1 billion in sales with a B. So he was really one of the movers and shakers behind the whole kind of, what do you call it, sort of JVC. I tend not to watch it myself, but the TV programs where they sell you stuff and very, very effectively. That's the one. Yeah. Yeah. So obviously the real powerhouse of the marketing thing. But really the first concept, so these are, by the way, 10 concepts. A couple of the guests have given me, I think, a couple of concepts. The first concept is really about the nature of selling on Amazon. And really, there are 2 powerful things that Jason Boyce said from bitter experience, sometimes some good experience. First thing is, Amazon is not your cuddly friend. They're a shark. And the second thing is, as he says, if you're not on Amazon, you're not on the internet. Now, that's a very challenging thing to say to a Shopify store owner. But that's his contention, and there is some logic behind it, and there's also some strong discussions to be had. But I think those 2 things are very thought-provoking starting points, at least, for how one should therefore operate. And broadly speaking, I suppose what he's saying is his experience, and it's very, very Amazon-centric, so I had to take that in context, is that you have to be on Amazon, but you have to be very aware of what you're doing and the fact that you're swimming with a shark, and therefore, act appropriately, i.e. defensively, and have a defensive strategy.
Swimming with a shark. That sounds dangerous.
It does.
Did he have some scary stories and all that kind of thing about why he felt like Amazon was not your cuddly, blanket of warmth and happiness in your business?
Yes, he did. I mean, broadly speaking, a couple of things. I mean, first of all, if you're reselling stuff, then one of the things, and I don't think this is going to apply to any of your replens guys necessarily, because I think that big dynamics probably happened already. But one of the things is, if you're reselling stuff, Amazon will try and go and approach those guys and form a relationship directly. Jason's defensive strategy, it's like a sort of arms race, and because he sold for 17 years, you can really see the trend, which is the second thing I was going to talk about, the second point that grows out of this. But just to answer the point of how to defend yourself, when Amazon started going to his wholesale or replens contacts and reselling the stuff he was reselling, directly cutting him out as a middleman, he would create exclusive products. So he wasn't the private labeler, but the manufacturers he was working with would create exclusive products for him, which is an interesting halfway house. And then Amazon would either go to them and threaten to kick them off the platform they didn't sell direct to them, or possibly just start private labeling their own version. Then he moved over into private labeling, and Amazon just sort of started copying the basic products. Occasionally, although it's harder to do, would go direct to his competition, his manufacturer in China, although that's hard to do. And then really what it came down to is a defensive strategy. There's good news at the end of this horrible tale, which is that Amazon is horrendously bad, amazingly kind of almost hilariously at listing stuff on their own platform. If you ever sell directly to Amazon, and I would tell everyone never ever to do this, what they'll do is you'll take your 9 beautifully produced images and replace them with 2 images on white and horrible boring bullet points. So that is where our opportunity is, and they are still terrible at selling on Amazon. Amazon is terrible at selling on Amazon. Weird thing to say, but their listings stink, and therefore that's our opportunity, is to just be fantastic at branding, of course, particularly visual branding, mostly photography, and nowadays it's video as well.
Wow, love it. Okay, so that was guest number 1 and 2, Jason and Rick, and concept number 1. And then is there the second concept from those guys?
Yeah, I mean, really, it's not so much a concept as my observation or my, experience, if you like, through them of the journey. Because I've been selling on Amazon since 2014, and it's changed a lot in that time. But I think Jason started in something like 2003, so he's really had, I mean, pretty much from the earliest days that you could actually sell on Amazon as a third-party seller. So he's really seen the whole trend, and that, of course, is within the Amazon space. It reflects quite a lot of the broader e-commerce space as well. And I think really, as I've described, the sort of defensive strategies he's had to make. Thus, I would suggest that I suppose there's a parallel between, if you like, the history of Amazon and what people did to make money as third-party sellers, and the sort of business models that I would suggest people go through in order to start with something simple, but end up with something that is defensible, I guess. And that's the journey that that Jason was forced to make.
Interesting.
And that really comes from, simply reselling and the sort of retail arbitrage, online arbitrage, or wholesale sourcing type thing, through the as I've mentioned, the getting exclusive products made for you through proper wholesale relationships. And Replens sits somewhere in between, I guess, retail arb and online arb and wholesale.
Sure.
So it's an interesting part of the journey to make. But I would suggest also, if you really want to create a defensible business, you're going to eventually end up pushed by the dynamics towards private labeling and or sort of unique products, which cost more money but is more defensible, and the business you create thus is more sellable. So it's a sort of journey.
Yeah, I love that. From simple to defensible.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's a journey. That's a really interesting idea.
It's a big journey, obviously, because simple is simple to start. And I think, and I know that your philosophy is like this, and I think you're much better than me at this, which is to keep things simple. And you have that knack of that sort of, I know you're from California originally. You've got that California optimism and an American optimism more generally. And that's a fantastic thing, because otherwise you can overthink and never start. And I did that for like 15 years of my life before I really got started in business online at about the age of 40, and it took 15 years. So the nice thing about reselling is you just start, and it costs you $100, $200 to start, and you learn stuff very quickly by doing, which is fine. And it's great to start with things that don't scale, which is nearly a concept that I brought in from Will Chernan, but the context was too complicated. He said, start with things that don't scale, which is great, but equally, if you do something simple, it's easier for other people to copy, so it's not defensible. So start simple with the understanding that you're going to need to develop, and that's great. If you start complex, you never start. If you stay simple, it's not defensible, and you'll do that horrible thing where you go round in circles working really, really hard and wondering why I'm making less and less profit over time rather than more. And the answer is because your business model isn't defensible.
I love it, man. I love it. So the third concept is from a guest, Dylan. Who's Dylan, and what's the third concept?
So Dylan Frost is part of the Wholesale Formula. There's a guys, Dylan and Dan. They're both Kentucky boys. It doesn't mean that much to me, except that I've watched, I think, was it called Faithless or something? There was some TV shows, which means I know nothing about reality of Kentucky life, but they seem sort of very feet on the ground kind of guys, and they built businesses up. They didn't have a lot of money to start. They started with arbitrage and retail and stuff, and they've developed through to mostly focusing on wholesale. Their clients, I think, they've done themselves. They've had sort of 8-figure years, sort of 20 million a year plus revenue, and their clients have collectively done, I think, over $1 billion in sales now. So they really know how to teach this stuff. And Dylan was talking to me about really the difference between private label and wholesale, and I think it's really important in the early stages. There's the keeping it simple, and then there's a conceptual framework understanding of the context. And there can be, to that point, which seems to be another theme that's emerging organically, is simple versus complex. I mean, I think it's important to understand, have a bit of context as to what is it you're doing, what business model are you actually operating. And that's okay. You don't need to be too complicated. But if you think you're driving a go-kart and you're driving, a Porsche, the driving style's going to kill you. So you need to be clear at least what it is you're doing. And I think the differences between private label and wholesale are very interesting because they have some similarities. I would say if you start with the easiest but least defensible online arbitrage, so retail arbitrage now, online arbitrage maybe, wholesale is the next obvious step, which is that you are reselling, but you have, or replens is that sweet spot in between, right? Where you get replenishable stuff, i.e. you don't have that tragic thing where you find a wonderful thing, you sell a load of it, and you go back and you can't sell anymore. So it's the next natural step from replens. Private label is one of those things that you naturally end up going to push towards as well. And the wholesale formula guys do some private labeling. So you don't have to be either or. You can blend them. And some of the people in my masterminds are blend a hell of a lot of wholesale, like to the tune of 10 million bucks a year, but are also adding on their own private label products because it turns out it's really, really hard to sell a wholesale-based business. So this is where that continuum, fits.
It's so funny you mentioned this one. I don't know if you watched my my go live into our replens group yesterday from my kayak in the middle of Lake Tapps.
Oh yeah, I saw a bit of that, and I was really intrigued by the kayak. I thought I've got to watch this, but I haven't got time. So it was,
I did a live from my kayak, cool. And I did my conversation was called the long game, and one of my things I shared as an encouragement was just understanding that your business model is not your business. And that your business model is something that you run like a vehicle. You learn to drive it and you go someplace and it's a good time. And it's just exactly what you were just sharing. So very, very similar to the, Dylan Frost concept, I guess. And that is that you can certainly learn replens as a model, scale it up, have a great time with it.
Yeah.
Automate the process, add team members, really focus on your financials so you know exactly what you're doing. And then that frees you up to explore different business models. And that's a very common journey from wholesale selling to private label selling. And that, I guess both of those would be a step, not beyond, but just, an incremental step, after retail arbitrage or replens. And so it's interesting to hear the bigger, sellers. That is generally a path to scale, is scaling with wholesale and then being safer or more secure with private label concepts.
What I would say, agree with what you're saying, and I'm looking forward to watching that kayak video because even visually it was very arresting. I'm like, oh, there's a kayak.
It's very nice.
What's Jason up to? So great marketing, by the way. So to your points, yes, your business, not your business model, very important. What I would say is your skill set and your understanding of context, which is slightly different things but related, are not the same as your business or your business model either. But the lovely thing is that your business can build on, for example, replan strategy and move into wholesale. The skill set you need in terms of analyzing what's going on Amazon is probably pretty similar. You've got stock management skill, you've got cash management, you've got people management, processes. A lot of the things can be taken over, but some of the things will be different, and you need to be very aware what's the same, what's different. And one of the things would be more the business-to-business skills, really the business-to-business sales skills, I think is what wholesale's all focused on. So yes, you've got a lot of things that are similar enough, but as long as you know what's different, which is still very important. The only thing I would say about that is that the danger of just because it's on Amazon, you think it's the same business model. The characteristics of the business model as an abstract thing, how the cash flows, what's defensible about it, what isn't. I think that abstract sense, you need to be very clear-minded about. More to your point, really.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. Love it. And of course, when people start to work on their private label products, that's when they do enter my domain, if you will, in terms of Shopify sites. And it's always so fun. I looked on Udemy. I think I'm over 36,000 students now in my Udemy courses for all things Shopify related. And so that is an incremental step and a journey towards more defensible strategies. Okay, so let's keep going. Your fourth business concept from your fourth guest was a guy, Kevin. What's his deal? Who's he and what does he talk about?
Kevin King is a sort of giant of Amazon guru sort of teaching and stuff. I think he's a very, very sharp guy. I remember speaking to him in about 2016 when he was doing really well selling on Amazon, and a friend of a friend introduced us, and he gave value after value. It was just tons of intensely great stuff. And we got off air and I said to him, dude, you should do consulting. And he said, nah, I'm making enough money for my Amazon course. And next thing you know, of course, somebody's got their hooks into him, and he's busy these days being very much a consultant plugged into the Helium 10 universe with Manny Coates' thing.
Okay.
So he is a genuine, expert in visual selling. He's been in the retail space for about 20, 25 years now, and on Amazon for quite a long time. And the thing that he came up with, he's always coming up with interesting concepts. He's very much got his finger on the pulse. But one thing he said was a very simple thing around the product selection thing, which is the absolute obsession of any private label seller, or even more of would-be private label sellers. The really established people, by the way, I noticed aren't obsessed with product selection. They're obsessed with cash management and stock management, interestingly, to which more later. But this was really about what people call product selection. Now, of course, I think that's completely the wrong word. I think it's market selection, or more specifically, keyword-driven market selection.
Okay.
And that's a very narrow way of looking at the universe that I think is in itself risky. And I'm sure that Kevin would agree. But he basically said, instead of thinking about a sort of trying to dominate a very specific 4 or 5 set of keywords, the wiser approach often, especially in very competitive markets, and most of them are competitive in 2021 and beyond, is to go for long tail keyword things. In other words, he said, if you're trying to get into a house, it's going to be a lot easier if there are a lot of doors and a lot of windows as opposed to one main door, which makes a lot of sense. So instead of, I always think of the most obvious examples are the ones that I spent hours working on with my clients. And of course, I don't want to reveal their keywords because everyone's paranoid about that. But let's say, for example, you're trying to sell an iPhone stand. You're probably not going to have a trillion words that aren't things like iPhone stand for iPhone, smartphone holder, etc., right?
Yeah.
But that's going to be really hard to break into, apart from the fact that, by the way, don't do this at home. That's a horrendous idea on Amazon anyway. Although there are marketplaces where you can still make money with those kinds of keywords, but not Amazon. But you could try and find something that has a lot more ways in. I'm just trying to think of something. I don't have a neat thing off the top of my head. But there are certain types of products where there isn't a single keyword or set of keywords that neatly defines it. There are 4, 5, 6 obvious main keywords that could describe it. And then there are lots and lots of smaller ones. And that's his basic concept. It's wise to go for that kind of product, win the longer tail keywords, and over time work your way to winning ranking for the short tail keywords.
And his name was Kevin King again.
Kevin King.
Did he give any kind of tips, tools, or resources for doing? Is that helium-10, or like what's the tool set for finding those kind of long tail keyword opportunities?
Yeah, I guess he would talk helium-10, but I mean, partly it's just a question of trying stuff and then seeing what happens. But that sounds very, very vague. But what I mean is, in your journey through a bunch of keywords and product ideas, you're bound to come across this. In my experience, you will come across some stuff that's just dominated by a handful of keywords, and it's pretty obvious who the big players are, and it's dominated. I mean, there's not much point in going to these markets unless you have very deep pockets and a really great differentiation point, and very, very good quality suppliers as well, I would say.
Yeah.
But as you go along, sometimes you'll find a market which is tempted to dismiss, and I think that at that point, that's when you should actually switch on your kind of opportunity meter and go, aha, hang on a second.
Yeah. And we've talked about that before in our prior episodes when we talk about total addressable market and the switchable total addressable market, and the idea of looking for the non-dominated niches, and finding these niches that are just totally fractured and really don't have any dominant players. Now, that might be a warning to you to stay out. It might also be an invitation for you to build a brand in that space.
Slight nuance on that. I mean, yes, it does tie into that discussion. Well, I guess what I'm talking about isn't the competition and how fractured they are. It's about the search terms and the keywords that the consumers use, that they aren't as incredibly unified and simple in one set. So it's a slightly different point. It may again be a warning sign because it's going to be a little bit harder to target in a simpler way, but it's more winnable probably. So it's broadly speaking a very similar sort of strategy to that's been played on Google for years. And I guess if you have a blog attached to your Shopify site, this would be a really standard thing as well, that you aim for the longer tail keywords and you try and rank for those. As such, you start to get ranking juice for the medium tail keywords, you start to target those, and you start to get ranking juice over time for the short tail keywords that really have the high search volume.
Yeah. Okay,
so
great.
It's an old school but important thing.
All right. So your fifth business concept is from Stephen somebody. Who's Stephen and what's the concept?
Stephen Summers from Marketplace Superheroes. So he's really talking about, he's also a person who very much focuses on private label and product research. I'm in a way sorry to talk about it twice, but it's such a big obsession and important point that, that's why I thought it was worth referencing twice. Really, it's about how you define success, and it's an important thing that actually can be very nebulous when you say. People often say to me if they're starting off with a private label product, or even sometimes more established sellers haven't defined success and they just keep selling stuff because it has revenue, but does it have much profit, and that kind of question. So it really comes down to a meta concept, which is defining what is a winner, and then a more straightforward concept, which is their definition of a winner with private labeling, is that it will double the initial investment within 9 months, which is actually putting the bar reasonably low, but nevertheless it's quite a rational and very measurable, simple definition.
Double the initial investment in 9 months. So if you invested $10,000 in your cost of goods to get it all going, you'd want to have $20,000 by the end of 9 months.
Yeah. Now, I didn't have the discussion with him in enough detail. I don't remember anyway exactly what he meant by initial investment. Knowing me, that's exactly the sort of thing I'd pin somebody down on. So if you want to go and listen, that the podcast is called Product Research for Amazon with Stephen Summers of Marketplace Superheroes. Not a very imaginative title, so you should be able to find it. So I can't remember what it meant by initial investment. For me, initial investment would be all the money you put in up front. So that would include the cost of goods sold, that would include freight, that would include any import duty, etc. So I'd probably define it that way. There's not going to be a monster difference between the two.
No, I love that, and I love the emphasis on making money. You know me, like I mean, I love the business models that have high, return on investment, and so that's just what we focused on for a long, long time. And I do always worry, in a way. I don't know why I worry for other people, but I worry for people who have a high velocity, sales business with no profit or low profit. They obviously can improve margins, but if you run it that way for too long, you get used to it, and that's just a lot of hard work for a little payoff many times. And so the models that can generate good solid returns, I think, are smaller frequently to run at a level that gives you a big payday. And obviously, it helps you clarify what you're in business for, which is the bottom line.
Yeah.
And I think those are important concepts and valuable ideas. So Stephen Summers, that's great. Love that one.
Yeah, and just to say on that, just to clarify, that is for private label customers
Concept.
or concepts. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing to say is, on the one hand, the one extreme is you don't ever worry about profit, and you're just saying absolutely rightly, you have to make sure you get into the habit of doing that. And as you say, it is a habit. As you said, choose the rut you're going to be in because you're going to be in for a long time. Remember that phrase from a podcast. It's a very, everyday phrase, but it's really very true. Whatever habits you get into, good or bad, you're going to tend to stick. So you're right. Having said that, it is also a corrective to this insane idea that you can replace your day job in 12 months from a private label business from scratch. And I have had clients come to me who've had that promise made to them in 2020, which blew my mind. In 2014, that was just about doable, maybe. So I think that doubling the investment in 9 months it is actually a very positive result, but it's quite a humble sort of thing to aim for. It's very realistic as well. So that's why it really struck me as really good wisdom as well.
Yeah. And I guess I should just tune up that one for 1 second with the understanding that if you're just starting out in day one or week one or year one on online selling, your first goal is to find something to sell and to get it sold. And you'll learn in that process. And so after doing this for whatever it's been, 13 years or something like that for us, we just set the bar for ourselves very, very differently. That's not the goal. After a decade of doing it, just making sales isn't the goal. But when you're starting out, just, get something that you can sell, learn the mathematics, learn, how to put together a profit and loss statement, the cash you made and the expenses you had and what happened at the end, and do that on a monthly, quarterly, annual basis. If you just go through that cycle for a year or two and you're learning the ropes, you're in a great place. And so I don't want to discourage people by saying, hey, you've got to have a super high profitable product from day one. It's not realistic frequently. And so I don't want to, discourage people with my grumpy old man, old seller commentary. But anyway, I just wanted to make sure I said that. So,
no, good point. And in other words, I suppose to put it in another way, I think Seth Godin put this as often very, very well. He said, you've got to have a time and you've got to have a number. and you're going to stop at that time or that number. In other words, if your business hasn't got to profit or cash flow positive or whatever it is you're defining, profit is a good number, then
Yeah.
you got to stop. And I think you're absolutely right that people can, for a very long time, do this trap. It's not so much no profit on Amazon, because that is too soul destroying to keep going. It's when you've got revenue and you've got profit, but there's not anything like as much as you think until you do the sums at the end of the year. That's kind of soul destroying. I've got a couple of clients in that situation at the moment, and I can see a couple of habits that they've got in their business. You adding, too much overhead with staff too quickly, over investing in products of which the quality is fantastic, but the cash flow characteristics are awful, etc. That I look at it, I think that's kind of tragic. If you're making 5% on $1 million a year and you've got two business partners, very quickly the personal income from that is incredibly disappointing for the risk and effort. And that's where you're absolutely bang on. That's the point in the process of business development where you really have to take stock. At the beginning, equally, you should probably set yourself the opposite goal, which is make no profit for the first year, or begin to get into profit if you look at the last 3 months in isolation. But for the year as a whole, it's loss making, but you've established yourself in a category and so forth. So you're right. It's a nuanced business.
Sorry, this is a great one to just keep camping on for
It
a
is,
minute before we get on to number 6 here.
Sure.
But let me just say this final commentary. What you'll find over time, and I think, Michael, you probably see this as much as I do, is you work with a lot of clients and coaching and students and looking at their sites and their products and how they do their business. You frequently will find very profitable small businesses that can be run profitably, but just have reasons why they don't get huge. And then you have bigger product opportunities that can be omni-channel, that can be huge, but are lower profit and can be no profit. And it's almost like it's like a different plant in your garden. One will grow really, really high, but there's no fruit on the tree. And the other one is a shrub, but it's really fruity and it's got a lot of terrific fruit on it. And it's just two different businesses. And I think part of the process at the beginning of starting out is understanding what business business model you've got and the aspects of it.
Yeah, you need to be clear about, again, it comes down to business model discussion, doesn't it? If a venture capitalist invests in something like Uber, they expect it to lose cash and lose profit and make a loss, which are two separate things, by the way, for a long time. The question is whether in future they're going to get a massive payoff, and that's a risky approach, but at least there's a rationale to it. What is soul destroying is to do something where your intention was to make profit from about month 6 and you make no profit for 3 years, and that can be done alarmingly easily. And you're right, and that makes no sense at all.
Well, let's keep going on our list here. So your 6th business concept is 3 classic stock management errors. Who taught you that, and what's that concept all about?
This is a chap called Marvin Harris from Ovals with a Z or a Z, and he's a management consultant who actually he's got tons and tons of experience in this area. I don't think he's sort of pre-packaged himself in a neat enough kind of way compared to Helium 10 or whatever to neatly say exactly what he does, but he's certainly very good at the sort of strategy behind sort of integrating things like your customer expectations, stock management, that sort of thing. But we specifically talked about inventory management because for the more established players, and this is, by the way, very true, even more true, I would say, in online arbitrage or retail arbitrage or replens than it is for a private label seller of the same kind of revenue size. Because I know friends of mine who was private label sellers would make the same revenue with 10 to 20 product lines, who would have to manage 500-600 product lines as retail arbitrages. So stock management is really important.
So the stock management errors, what are the 3 errors? What are they?
So the 3 errors, the first one is general inventory item errors, so spoilage and location errors. So location errors would be you think it's in warehouse A, but it's in warehouse B. Now, if Amazon does a lot of the warehousing for you, you could get lazy about it, but as I'm going to talk about it, one of the trends of 2020 that is definitely continuing into 2021, and I can see only being worse in Q4, is going to be the fact that Amazon cannot cope with all your inventory needs. So you're going to have to be much more aware of where your inventory is. It's going to be in more places. If you're starting out, maybe in a garage or whatever your bedroom and Amazon, but in the end, if you're doing it at scale, it's going to be in a third-party warehouse. It may be a prep center, particularly if you're reselling, actually. And it might end up in lots of different places. So location errors is kind of obvious, but it's something you really have to see coming, that if you're managing as a retail arbitrager 400 product lines with 3 different locations for stock, and then X number of units in each one, you really, really have to get on top of it, and fairly early actually as well.
That's interesting. Location management of your product.
Yeah.
You know what? To be honest, I hear about those things in my coaching conversations, and I've never had somebody stick such a fine point on it. So 3 classic stock management errors. The first one is location confusion, I guess you could call it. Is that, what's the second one?
Well, he calls it general inventory item errors, which includes location. There's spoilage as well, which is when somebody's dropped something, or your chocolate's melted in Florida, or your supplements have reached a sell-by date as well. So there's that as well, which is, so there's just, once you get into inventory management, kind of unsurprisingly when you think about the business model, but we kind of forget that there's just a lot of work around that. And if you don't have systems in place, or at least start developing them early, you get in big trouble. So the second error is monitoring errors. So in other words, there's a system, and then there's actually in the warehouse, and it could be as simple as the system is you've got a spreadsheet on your computer, and the warehouse is your garage. That's a bit more manageable, but the sort of blue collar approach to things could be really helpful, like go and get your hands dirty and literally check your inventory yourself once a week, because you may find some big disparities. So that's actually, I think, a really horrible error, because when you think you know something and it's wrong, that's when you can go into really big trouble. For example, if you were selling, even on Amazon, if you were selling items either fulfilled by merchants, because FBA's run out of stock, the Amazon warehouse system cannot accept more stock or refuses to accept it, and you make a promise to somebody by selling something on Amazon, and you think you had 10 to sell, and you make 10 sales on Monday, and you go into your garage to go and fulfill them, and you had 8, guess what? You're going to have to cancel those 2 orders. And if you cancel several more orders that week, Amazon could even suspend your entire account, because if you keep canceling orders, that really affects your order defect rate. So this is a very practical, very potentially business threatening problem, and you just have to work really, really hard to work on this, and it's not an easy thing to solve, but it's just critical, so you've got to get started.
Monitoring errors. That is so interesting. 2 stories popped in my mind. I'm debating whether I should mention one. Well, I'll say it at just the highest level. Familiar with a recent story of someone who installed cameras in their warehouse, discovered theft was occurring, and had to deal with it. But the cameras was the first indication, but then the monitoring of inventory and stock would have been a prior indication, but it did, it wasn't as buttoned down maybe as could have been to reveal such theft. That's interesting. The other story that comes to my mind immediately as you mention this is we have a tool in the Legendary Seller Toolkit that's a reimbursement process. And many Amazon sellers who sell at high volume, Amazon owes them money. And there are services that charge 25% commission to kick off those reimbursement requests. Our software tees it up for you. You do it yourself, and we don't take any cut. It's just a tool that we have available. And I think you might know a lot better than I do, but surprising how many times Amazon sellers don't go through their reimbursement requests and say, hey, please give me my money. You destroyed my inventory. I want my reimbursement, please. And that's a monitoring error. I've never thought of it this way. This is gold, man. It
really is. Really, I tell you what, nobody really tends to talk that much about inventory management because it's not very sexy. The people who do, by the way, I think I've had 2 guests and one who's teed up to be a guest talk about refunds. And there's a 4th guy who hasn't even mentioned it on the show, but he does do them. And people will pay anywhere between 20 and 30% often. And then there's software like yours that will flag it up for you. It's just huge. I mean, this is money that technically appears on your balance sheet because it's your money, but in terms of cash, it's in Amazon's account and not yours. And it, for other marketplaces, could be just as bad. I don't have that experience. Honestly, it could be a lot. I had a seller friend who was this is 2 or 3 years ago when I think Amazon was worse at this, but was doing sort of about $500,000 a month in revenue, and sort of in January, probably in that Q4, employed somebody full time to get it, and he had something like $150,000 that Amazon owed him. I mean, if you're doing substantial revenue, it can be a lot of money. It's really hugely worth doing, and it's quasi-free money, which is why you can justify paying somebody 25%, because otherwise it was just going to sit there. Technically, it's owed to you, and technically, it kind of would appear on a balance sheet if you're aware of it, of course. But it's not in your account, so you can go broke whilst actually having a balance sheet accounts receivable of $100,000. So it's absolutely an easy win in the sense that it's just totally worth being absolutely on top of that. And Amazon's, reasonably quick to refund you once you actually point out the error. I don't
Yeah.
think they're necessarily trying to defraud you. I haven't got the information to even make
Hmm.
an allegation.
Hmm. Yeah.
I think it's just they're managing just a monster size operation, and they just don't get around to paying people.
We've looked at the stats for our tool. It's in Legendary Seller, and we
Mm,
have about a 50% success rate. So when you kick off a reimbursement request, 50% of the time, you'll end up with money back. And I don't remember the exact number of reimbursement total amount we've helped people receive, but it's a ton of money.
yeah.
I don't want to quote a number because I'm sure I'll quote wrong, but it's a lot of money that people have gotten back by just going through the process. And I will just say this, that in your early days of online selling, if you're just starting out, you're much, much better off being methodical about your finances,
Oh, yeah.
tracking, using a Google Sheet or an Airtable, really doing a profit and loss statement, looking to find how to get a good profit and loss statement template, learning QuickBooks. In your first year, if you do all of that financial management, even though it feels like just drudgery and just like, I hate this, it's really, really valuable as you scale because you'll have the habits and the systems in place to say, oh, I always get my money. Oh, I always do a P&L. Oh, I always evaluate my expenses monthly and quarterly. I'm always trimming off dumb expense dollars that I don't need to spend money on. And my
Mm,
profit margin goes up, 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 up in my business because I do all these rigorous actions. That is how people make real, real money from
yeah.
not that huge of sales. From a six-figure business or a low seven-figure business, they make a wonderful living
Yeah.
because they're locked down on their numbers.
100%. And I agree absolutely. So, two things. First of all, financial measurement and inventory management are absolutely two sides of the same coin. Because
Hmm.
if you think about
Hmm.
it from a balance sheet point of view,
Yeah.
they are both current assets. So, it doesn't actually change your profit and loss whether something is stored as a widget or as cash. But cash is king. Therefore, if you mess
Hmm.
up your cash flow, your business dies. So,
Hmm.
you absolutely have to know where your stock is and whether you can sell it. The other thing to say is on the question of kind of coming back to this context that I sort of painted at the beginning, which is that the bigger picture of which business model you're working on. In a lot of ways, private labeling or custom products manufacturing is a much more advanced and tricky business model. But here's one way in which you have to be much more grown up, much quicker, as it were, as a business person in the stuff you were saying. Retail arbitrage, you can end up with 400, 500, 600 product lines so quickly, and being methodical about tracking those is loads harder,
Yeah.
like a lot harder than tracking 5 or 6 products that are
Yeah.
private label.
Totally.
So you,
Yeah.
to your point, I couldn't agree more. You have to just make yourself be rigorous,
Yeah.
and it's not that much fun. But guess what? Profit's nice because you can eat.
This is one of the biggest paradoxes in business is that some of the most entry level jobs, this is even true in your corporate career because I was in office job for 20 years. Some of the most entry level jobs are the hardest jobs. And the more advanced jobs become easier and easier and easier if you have the skill set to do them. They seemingly become simpler jobs, and it's just a paradox. And but all that to say, you got to learn these lessons well about monitoring. Okay, so that we're sorry to recap. We're in three classic stock management errors. The first one was location and understanding. You keep using the phrase I keep botching, but it's
Spoilage, yeah,
spoilage errors.
yeah,
The second one is monitoring errors. What's the
yeah.
third error?
Third area, and by the way, this is a huge area, right? But I've kind of bundled it into one thing. But yeah, this is where the grown-up people actually focus. Whether you be starting out from new, as you were studying, saying, or
Mhm.
the private label sellers that I work with at scale. The third one is count errors. So this is where the biggest numbers of problems and profits come. I'm afraid this is even worse than the other ones. Typos, for example, writing that you've got 1,110 as opposed to 110 or something.
Mhm.
Information not being communicated in real time, so then the physical count and reporting systems don't match up, and then wrong pricing on an item as well. So the count errors, generally speaking, are errors in the actual information as opposed to a difference between the real world and the systems.
Now, that is perplexing to me, but I guess it totally makes sense. And I just reflect back on this keynote address we had from Scott Needham, who's the co-founder of BuyBoxer, who was on our
Mm,
30-day replenish challenge. He was a keynote speaker this last Monday night.
mm,
And one of the comments he made was about this idea of testing your prices up as well as down, and managing your repricers really, really carefully. And he said one error that he made in his business that was a huge mistake was he started selling $500 items for $50 accidentally, and liquidated
Yeah.
stock at
Yeah.
$50 because
Ooh.
it was a pricing error. So it goes
Yeah.
totally to your point. So I guess Marvin knows what he's talking about with these
This guy
three
really
classic
does. I mean,
stock
he's not a
errors.
name that's big in the Amazon world. I don't think he's really focused on that, but he's a very competent chap. I mean, this was really
Wow.
this is why I brought it forward. I think
Yeah.
of all the stuff I brought today, it's probably the least sexy and it's going to require the most grunt work and it's probably the most important to your business because
Wow.
without getting this right, and he said that some crazy statistics, inventory distortion across retail in America alone is a $1 trillion a year loss. The
Wow.
average retailer in the USA has an accuracy rate. What do you think it is? Give me a percentage here.
80%.
I'd kind of hope for that, right? Apparently it's 62%.
Wow. Yeah.
Now, how are you defining accuracy rate? He's got a lot of metrics, so maybe he's being a bit harsh, but in other words, this is a serious problem for people who, manage big businesses. Hence why Amazon messes it up all the time and they give you refunds because Amazon's very meticulous. They have great systems. They are a systems and process obsessed company, I would say. They're driven by a physicist who worked at Wall Street. He's obsessed. But nevertheless, it's really hard. So all you got to do is just increase that accuracy over time and starting small and being close to 100% accurate when you have a really small amount of inventory maybe gives you a fighting chance where you have a bigger set of inventory. So it reinforces what you were saying, which is keeping really accurate records from day one.
I would love to learn more about that. Marvin Harris, Three Classic Stock Management Errors.
Yeah.
Is that the name of the podcast episode?
The name of the podcast was Inventory Management and E-commerce with Marvin Harris of Ovals with a Z. Okay, so yeah, awesome. not very exciting, but gosh, yes, so important.
Terrific. Okay, let's keep going. So the seventh business concept is what?
Well, the seventh one, I'm going to swap these around actually. The next one is by Will Chernand, who's a really great business thinker in the Amazon world and has been, as he said, in the Amazon echo chamber, as he calls it. Ironically, he's really dominant in the Amazon echo chamber, but he recognizes that you don't want to stay stuck in the Amazon echo chamber. You need to think rationally. So he's really been talking about fulfillment when FBA is full and really why Amazon might be slowing down getting customers. And really what he's saying is that they're basically, Amazon is in a difficult place now. Shopify likes it when more and more people who do their own fulfillment join them because they aren't trying to create a walled garden in that way. Sure. Amazon doesn't really like it when people are doing that because they want as much control as possible over the customer's experience, both for the customer's sake, but also for Amazon's sake. Mm-hmm. And they don't really want to be adding third-party sellers who do their own fulfillment, but they've absolutely reached capacity. So what's happening is that FBA sellers who've had the luxury of Amazon doing all the work for them, they've just sent stock into Amazon and it gets handled by Amazon. And to the point of what we were just talking about, the stock management's really hard. Yes, Amazon messes it up, but they deal with most of it very, very elegantly. And therefore, when you have to kind of emerge, blink into the sunlight in 2020 and 2021 and beyond, and do your own stock management, that is a harsh reality that we all have to get our heads around now as Amazon sellers, and I think for the future as well.
So is his advice then to get good at merchant fulfilled? And that's what he's talking about? I
think really, yeah. I mean, Will tends to sort of look in bigger picture concepts, and frankly, I'm a bit vague about all of the things that we talked about. But I think that the main thing that I took from it, and to my point earlier, please do go and listen. Will's a sharp guy. He probably said lots of great things that I've missed. But basically, and the episode, by the way, was called Amazon Fulfillment Problems and Solutions with Will Chernand of Goat Consulting. And broadly speaking, we have to just go through the pain of finding 3PLs, third-party sellers, third-party logistics, I should say, and make sure that we integrate that into our process rather than just lazily relying on FBA and hoping that this has been a blip. That 2020 was obviously an extreme year in e-commerce in terms of demand. I just think that that's it. You're just going to have to get your head around it and get good at it, and it's not easy, but the key is to find good partners who are not overly expensive and do your sums to see if you can still make a profit, and sadly sometimes you can't.
Okay, that's great. We had a recent conversation in our CEO small group. I lead a small mastermind. It's for our coaching clients, and we have a great time. We got like 23, 24 people in that, and a recent conversation about 3PLs and that kind of thing was interesting. And one of our clients said, he's used different ones, but his best advice is find one within driving distance of where you live so that you can literally go meet with them, talk to them, check it out, drive over as needed, even rig up, delivery of your inventory to them efficiently with your own means. And that was an interesting piece of advice, rather than just finding a big 3PL in Houston, Texas, or Denver, or whatever.
Yeah.
And that was interesting. So that's good advice. Okay, great.
It is. Just a couple of other nuances. To your point, I think the thing about physical, moving atoms is much harder than moving electrons, as they say.
Yeah.
Physical inventory is really hard, and to the point we just made, it's so easy to mess it up. If you can physically inspect inventory, at least in the early days, that's very wise. So yeah, having a very local warehouse, having a really good understanding of their exact processes is critical. And here's what I would say about the processes around inventory, whether it's managing stock in China, inspecting it, sending it up to be manufactured, managing reselling in America. It's all, the devil is in the detail. And it's more important to have robust processes that are proven than really slick, wonderful ones. So if their process sounds great on paper and you just trust them, that's riskier than somebody who's kind of a bit old school and very manual and a bit blue collar, but it works. So I would say that's another sort of criterion, is that it's robust, and they have things like error percentages and whatever. Like a guy with a spreadsheet is much more important than a guy with a sexy looking website, is what I would say.
Love it. Yeah.
The other thing to say about that is this, couple of things. And the ideal world for cash flow management and also stock flow management purposes, I guess you're only sending in a week or two's inventory at a time, so that you don't annoy Amazon with its IPI, inventory performance index, because if that gets really low, Amazon says you can only ship in 20, 30, 50 units of a product that's selling 1,000 a week, and it becomes very painful to try and make it work. So you do that. However, then you've got to look at the reality of how long it takes to ship stuff, how busy your warehouse is. It comes down to a lot of just, the numbers unfortunately drive things in a difficult way. The other reason that you might want to keep your own third-party warehouse stuff is that crazy things have occasionally happened on Amazon. For example, Will said that one guy he worked with had $1 million worth of stock destroyed as counterfeit, and it was unclear if it was counterfeit, so he kept it in the FBA warehouse system. So there are some even worse things that can happen. It's pretty rare, by the way. I've never personally come across it, but some strange things can happen in the FBA system if you, for example, get your account suspended, which does happen. I had a client in one of the masterminds have that horrendous sphincter tightening experience for 14 straight days recently, and in that case they will freeze all your assets, including your inventory and the financial, the money, in which case it makes sense to have some stock outside the Amazon system so that you can fulfill through other channels as well. So there's even more reasons, really, as the more you look at it, ever more reasons to have your own external to Amazon fulfillment. It's just a pain and expensive.
Wow, so good. Okay, let's keep going on our list. So the eighth business concept is what?
So this is much more kind of sexy stuff. Everyone loves talking about this stuff. This is the psychological drivers behind visual marketing. There's a lady who, to my shame, I just admit my idiocy, is a lady who's a modelpreneur, and I thought, a model, I wonder how intellectually challenging this conversation is going to be. And to my prejudice, I've never really spoken to a model before. And guess what? Super smart lady, very intellectual, actually very analytical lady. It's called Daisy Pollard Sepulveda. She was Miss Jamaica back in the day. She now lives in LA, surrounded by all the the beautiful people and that kind of environment, which is geared to wonderful visual imagery. And she's a specialist in model photography for physical products. I'd really recommend. It's called E-commerce Visual Branding with Daisy Pollard, and I'd totally recommend anyone to listen to it, because there's so much deep thinking that went behind it. So really what I got away from it is really there's we had a load of different conversations that we've had. Really, she talks about data-driven people versus creators, and that sort of ties in with the opportunity, I think, even on Amazon, even in 2021 and beyond, is that Amazon is very, very, very data-driven. It's a very engineering-type company, and therefore they're pretty horrible at doing their own listings. And one of the reasons that that doesn't work is Daisy's really in the business of, as is suitable for Tinseltown, selling desires, dreams, and concepts via images. And really, it comes down to that deep dive work, which I know you've got a fantastic course on Udemy that I've put my clients onto more than once around the branding concept. So, the visible brand, the invisible aspects, the iceberg brand concept, and all that stuff that you explain very, very well. And I send people there all the time. I don't think I get a commission. It's just because I think you've done a fantastic job. So that kind of work, and she really just has deep dived into that kind of work and just really digging into, if you're selling a garlic press, for example, exactly why would you buy that? And is it about really being a wonderful mother, or feeling like you're the right kind of person? How's it she put it? How you should be in the world. It's kind of putting across to people how in a commercial world of people looking over their shoulders, and I get the feeling that in American culture that's even more than in British culture in some places. How do you navigate that world? And your products and your photography and your whole branding efforts really are there to answer profound questions for people, maybe in a quick, superficial way, but that kind of idea. And it sounds very general, and I guess it kind of is, but I think it shows up in the particular, and I would just urge you to listen to the podcast with her, really.
Daisy Pollard Sepulveda.
Yeah, that's
Love
right,
that. I think the power of that whole concept really comes into play when you start to think about your secondary images on Amazon, of course, which people might refer to them as lifestyle or editorial photography. As soon as you start to make those decisions, you're making brand decisions. And even if you don't realize it, you are making brand decisions. And so understanding the invisible aspects of a brand, the big promise, and the other elements that you're indicating with your lifestyle photography is really important to understand. And that really gets, I think, even Amazon sellers who are just starting out, if they make a listing, then they've kind of reached a certain milestone in their Amazon journey. And if they've done that, then they've identified a niche that they're operating in. And if they've done that, then they've thought through what they want to do in that niche. And these elements have to be pulled together. And sometimes people just blunder their way through them. And, over a year or two, they're like, oh, wait, I guess I made a brand name and I didn't mean to. And I interact with a lot of clients or students through that brand course, and they'll say something like, well, I have an Amazon brand, but it's not really my brand. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? You got a different brand? Well, what they mean is, well, I just made it up. It's not really meaningful. We're like, well, sadly, friend, it is meaningful, and you might have just made it up, but it's time to go back through and really think through what is the visible and invisible aspect of it. What are you saying through it, and who are you attracting because of it? And all of those things. It sounds like Daisy is tapped into.
Oh, she's so all over it. She's fantastic. A really good thinker on this subject. Very, very deep thinker, I would say.
I love that.
2 or 3 things that strike me just relative to what you said. I mean, first of all, I'm working with a couple of different people that show how true it is at both ends of the scale. People who are just starting out. I've just had a client who's had the happy experience of really taking tremendous care over the visuals of her brand, and she started off and she's been selling, I don't know, 15, 20 units a day, something in the UK, which is, pretty good percentage of the market. Now, it's been early days. We're spending a lot on marketing, and the price is a bit lower, so whether that's the stable number in the end, I don't know. But she's kicked out of the gate with a relatively expensive product, which I thought was so generic that it was never going to work, frankly. But I tried to keep that to myself because she'd already chosen the product category and ordered the product before she then approached me for help. But guess what? I'm wrong, and I'm delighted to be wrong. And one of the reasons is because her branding is bang on. She absolutely gets her target customer. The visual imagery totally communicates that, and it's about a visual aspect. It's like beautiful kitchenware. So that does help. I've got another client who's super bright guy. He's a pilot. He's very sort of numbers and data driven, as you'd kind of hope. And he has been going through this process of creating a brand. And I think that we've hit on a brand identity that could cut through. So at that level, even at the beginning level, it really still makes a difference. You could still have an impact from day one. And the opposite extreme is I've got a client who's doing over $10 million a year in revenue, and they come from a sort of wholesale background. I've been working really hard to gently try and persuade, well, the lady I work with is fine, and her husband maybe is going through a journey of valuing the intangible brand things and then the brand assets, and it's been really hard work to improve that imagery on Amazon. And that's an example of the fact that it doesn't really matter when you wake up to the reality that branding is critical to the bottom line. Just get going, whether it's from day one. You've got an opportunity to brand build from the beginning, and if you kind of up through the journey, get started now because it's critical stuff.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I would just say that anytime you hear a story of, and I'll just use generalities, but like a 21-year-old Instagrammer who just
Mm.
made a ton of money, the product that seems to be a simple product, if you really peel back the layers, what you realize is they had visual design and aesthetic concepts on lockdown and are expert at the visual presentation of even a seemingly simple product. And that visual presentation at a high level wins the day over people who sometimes in categories have better products that are not presented as well. And so there's that tension between the artistry and the efficacy of effective brand and the quality of product and the rigor of the keywords and those kinds of things. It's just such an interesting kind of mosh pit of different strategies and styles that go together. So anyway, I love this
Yeah,
idea. Daisy
yeah,
colored
yeah,
Sepulveda,
yeah.
psychological drivers in image marketing. Love that
Yeah,
one.
she's a very, very sharp marketer, and I guess it kind of helps to be in Hollywood. I guess she's probably absorbed, you know,
Yeah.
whether consciously or unconsciously, some really deep understanding of how image and video
Yeah.
influences emotion, because that's the business of Hollywood, I guess,
Yeah.
that she's, in LA that she's in.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Let's keep
yeah.
going. So what's the ninth business concept and
The
who
ninth one
you learn
really
it from?
comes back to the more operational type stuff. So this is a chap that because he interviewed both of us a while ago, Dylan Carter of
Mm-hmm.
Vendrive CRM. Very sharp young man. He has just finished a finance sort of based qualification, but as it happens, he's also been building a wholesale business and an incredibly successful SAS, software as a service, two businesses on the side as well. So like a major overachiever, and really what he's talking about, this whole E-Myth Revisited, which I know we've discussed, and you've done a quick summary on the podcast before, and I think you and Carl discussed it, right? And it's a classic book, which can be therefore overrated and underrated. And one of the basic concepts in the E-Myth Revisited is it's really simple, that the technician works in the business doing the stuff, and actually everyone aspires to working on the business as the entrepreneur, creating a business system that ideally is sellable or runs without you, right? So what was interesting nuance on that one, when I spoke to Dylan, was the idea that actually working in your business is working on your business. In other words, and this doesn't conflict at all with the E-Myth Revisited, it's exactly what Michael E. Gerber said back in the day,
Mm-hmm.
which is that really you plan from the top and then you build from the bottom. So you figure out what the strategic objective of your entire business is. And to your point, profit's a good idea, hint, hint. And then you kind of try and build out your org chart, and then you start working on things. For example, if you're dealing with imagery, let's say that you decide that you're going to be, in my case, a very interesting learning that I've had this last week, that I'm actually better at Photoshop than I thought. And the Photoshop guys that I've hired in various places like Pakistan turn out to be really completely dumb when it comes to certain things that I thought I'd explain very clearly. Now, clearly, that's partly my management ability, right? So that's a whole different thing. But here's the point. This is a very good illustration of Dylan's point, which is by trying to be entrepreneurial and set up a system that will be scalable for one of my clients, and then I can scale for others, to scale up mass producing, increasing the quality of image work on Amazon product listings, right? And it could be true for Shopify as well, same difference. What I've discovered is, guess what? I've been trying to manage somebody, but I hadn't done the process myself. Now I'm being more the technician of the last few days and tweaking images, and I'm then sending them over to this guy to refine. Hopefully he's at least got that ability. What I've realized is, guess what? I tried to kind of skip over the process of the E-Myth Revisited and just go entrepreneur, manager, and then you do the technician stuff. What I've discovered, and I hadn't put two and two together between Dylan's thing and then this until this second, so this is live on air realization. Mike goes there. Guess what? I hadn't done it myself. Having done it myself, I can now break down much more specifically, step by step, what is it I'm doing physically on Photoshop, and give that to somebody, say, do this. And then I'll also hopefully be able to manage them more clearly, because I'll be managing somebody who gets what I'm trying to say, whereas before they didn't get. I was talking too abstractly about brand values and giving them what I thought was fairly concrete Pinterest boards for look and feel, and they came back with horrible stuff, and I thought, what's happening? So there you go. There's an example of this in action.
Okay, I want to take this a step further because I do love that E-Myth Revisited. It's a core concept, but here's what I think is a fascinating idea. And I've said this before in different podcasts, when I heard Elon Musk get interviewed, and the person said, how do you manage all these companies? You got the Boring Company, you got Tesla, you got SpaceX, you got Neuralink. Like, how do you manage it all? Like, and he said, I don't understand what you're asking. What do you mean? And she was like, what do you do all day? And he said, I don't know what people think I do, but I spend almost all my time on engineering mathematical problems. That's what I focus on. And he blew past what is, I think, a genius level realization, which he didn't articulate, but you kind of have to infer, which is he built a massive team and a business structure that allows him to do what he wants to do. It's like he created this organizational chart, and then he chose a role on the organizational chart for himself that he likes, that is not being the boss, which is totally different than Michael Gerber's E-Myth Revisited, which assumes you want to be the boss. But let's say you love Photoshop and you just want to spend all day long playing with Photoshop. You build a business that allows for that outcome, and you have a president or CEO or a team leader that runs all the aspects of a business that allows you the freedom to do what you want to do. And I think that's a nuance to this that's important. My wife, as my business partner for our core business, Pixie Fair, loves design. Although I might want her to be the CEO of the business, she loves design. So there's the reality there. We have to figure out, how do we build a business that she can be the designer full time? And I think there's nuance there. So starting with the E-Myth Revisited, and then Dylan Carter's conversation with you, I think sounds like fantastic groundwork for really thinking through these concepts of, what are you trying to build? What do you want to do inside of what you're doing, the business you're building? It's really important stuff.
Really love the insight you just given me, because what struck me the other day, and this is why I guess it's kind of meta conversation, that first of all, there is nothing like contact with reality to check your concepts, right? Yeah. And I guess this is why it's important to work in businesses, even if you're trying to create and work on them. Mm-hmm. So that's the first thing. The second thing, discovery that I made the other day, is I kind of thought, I put on some jazz and I was working at Photoshop, and I thought, yeah, I'm kind of enjoying this. I'm actually not bad at this now. I'm not claiming to be a Photoshop expert, sure, and I'm not aiming to be. But the point is, if I spend a certain amount of time in that middle ground where I feel I can add value, like choosing tasteful photos that reflect the brand value of the client, that I think I'm reasonably good at. I have a feel for branding. I've had a lot of training, including from you, which was excellent, by the way. And I can kind of, get a feel for what roughly is. I have a pretty good sense of what a good image should look like, and what the purpose is in the wider scheme of the marketing and all the rest of it. And then get somebody else to clean that up, and then document what I'm doing. Then to some degree, I'm actually reasonably happy doing that. Now, it's not highly scalable use of my time, but I guess if I just charge more for it and don't do that much of it, then yeah, there is something to be said for that. Because the other day I also had some keyword research work to do for a client, and guess what? I kind of ended up not doing it. That's the clue, right? I ended up doing the Photoshop work for longer than I should have, and enjoying it, and then I kind of shied away from the keyword research. I've done tons of it over the years, but I just didn't find it as creative. I guess, look, I'm a musician by training, so I guess maybe it's not surprising.
Yeah, really, I love this, and that's the important thing, is working out how you want to participate in your business is a central concept. Okay, let's go for the final concept here. Who shared it with you, and what's the concept?
So this was an interview from the beginning of 2021 with Dylan Frost, again from the Wholesale Formula. He's not the only person who's come on and made great predictions. It just happens to be, I think, the most recent. And he was talking about e-commerce trends that he's seeing coming, which is always interesting. I mean, especially in the light of the fact that when there's been a big upsurge, like there was in 2020, then the obvious thought is, well, okay, 2020 was a unique year. To some extent, I think that's true. But he was, I guess, again, being an American, I guess there's always an intrinsic optimism in Americans, because they live in this extraordinary rich country with an incredible integrated consumer population who love buying stuff. So I could see why. And it's an instant corrective for me as a Brit. He was saying that he thinks 2021 may even be a bigger year for e-commerce than 2020, because In the USA and quite possibly in Europe, there's a huge bull market coming. He was talking in January. It's now April when we're recording this, and certainly so far in terms of the S&P 500, if that's the right number, the FTSE 100, the German stock market, they're also trending up pretty strongly. And he was saying, okay, simply speaking, vaccines going to go to more and more people, and we get back to normal. I've certainly experienced that, as I just said myself at the beginning of before we started the podcast. I had a haircut last week, thank goodness, because I could leave the house, and next week I'm getting a vaccine. So that's proof that life is getting back to some kind of normal.
You're prepared to go out into the big wide world of London, huh?
I am. Well, I'm allowed legally. I wasn't allowed to go for a haircut before. So the second thing is that the people overcorrect behavior into normal activities. For example, travel and going out is going to go nuts because obviously we've all been stuck indoors for a year and more or less to some degree. There's a big stimulus in the economy in the USA. They had a huge stimulus. There's going to be another one after Biden's been sworn in. He was predicting, I guess, that, quite a lot of that has happened. And then when there was a stimulus in spring in 2020, there was a big spike in sales. So he was predicting that will also follow through in 2021. And there's just, broadly speaking, a lot of money knocking around in the economy. And I absolutely can see all of those factors. So broadly speaking, he was just saying he's very bullish about e-commerce in 2021. Now, okay, he's in e-commerce. He's selling e-commerce training. They only sell it once a year, by the way, so you can't get hold of their training for the moment. But Dylan Carter, if you are interested in wholesale sourcing, I would just say Dylan, Dillon, just to confuse things, because Dylan Frost is spelled Dyllan. Dylan Carter is a good place to start for wholesale sourcing work. But zooming out to the bigger picture, I think that there's a lot of reasons to be very optimistic in 2021. In 2022, I think 23, that might be where the kind of correction happens. And I can't predict the future that much, but I certainly think it's a great year to be getting into e-commerce, despite the fact that 2020 was a great year as well.
Yeah, we're obviously catching a wave as e-commerce sellers. It was a great year to get into e-commerce in 2007. It was a great year in 2008. It was a great year in 2009. It's a great year in 2010. I went full time as joined my wife in our family business on January 1st, 2014. That was a great year.
Yeah.
The whole COVID lockdown thing accelerated everyone's understanding of e-commerce worldwide. And I heard the Shopify CEO say that their projections for 2030 in terms of sales volumes, gross merchandise volume, all that came true in 2020. So a full decade of acceleration occurred because of COVID. So I just continue to be bullish on the idea of us finding our way in e-commerce as individuals, or finding our business model, our niche, and really, really doing the work to learn how to become effective operators. It is a wonderful time to get into this industry, and it's just a process of learning the skill sets. And I look at it just like anything else. If in the days of Henry Ford, somebody said, "Hey, it might be a good idea, a good time to get into the automobile industry," I'm like, "Yeah, that's a good idea." Or in the days of whoever created electricity, Tesla, or whoever you want to attribute it to 100 whatever years ago, like, that's a good time to be an electrician. Like, this is a good time to be an e-commerce operator. Just is. I mean, it's a massive forever trend that's not going to stop. So
yeah, interesting. I mean, I guess there you go. This is why I need optimistic Americans. The only part of me is the reversion to the mean thing, that if it goes crazy and you have 10 years worth of growth in 2021, my expectation would it be fairly flat in 22. I think maybe that shows up somewhere. I'm not sure, but I think you're right. And actually, for the moment, it's simply, incredibly strong reasons to be bullish on it. The other thing I would say is this, which kind of I think it's going to be true anyway. It may be true more rapidly than not, but that's the development of the sophistication of the market. As people talk about saturation, I remember talking before I even got close to Amazon with people talking about online marketing about 2007 when I first got serious professional training in it, and people were saying, "Oh, so and so is saturated." And he said, "No, it's not saturated. It's just moved on." So in other words, can you just whack up some awful product from China with no feeling for who might buy it and no keyword research of any quality in a big market? Well, no. But guess what? There are still opportunities created by people like Amazon who are awful at selling products. So if you do an amazing deep dive into your customer avatar and you do some wonderful editorial / product commercial type photography, you're already still going to be ahead of the game. But I think within a year, you're going to have to be at that level just as an entry level. So in other words, to your point of being a craftsperson and having the skill set, you need to have a better skill set, and the barrier to entry from the point of view of skill set and possibly finance, I think is higher than it used to be. They're bigger, more valuable markets, just like a real estate market. If you want to buy property somewhere valuable like San Francisco or New York, you're going to have to spend more money, or Seattle even, than you would do buying somewhere nowhere. But you're going to have to spend more money and more effort, but the rewards are going to be huge as well. So I think you just have to be more professional than you used to be, and to that end, I guess getting training is more crucial than ever as well.
Well, but the good news is there's so much more training now than ever. So you can be more professional immediately than you could be in 2007 or 2008, when in the U.S. at least the only person teaching people stuff was Dave Espino on how to sell on eBay type stuff. Absolutely. Well, this is a wonderful list, top 10 list. So in the show notes on the ecommerceleader.com, we will put links to all these episodes. So if you want to go through and listen to every one of these conversations Michael's had, then we'd love to have you do that. I'll just close our conversation here by saying, if you want help transitioning from reselling or doing replens or doing arbitrage to becoming focused on private label, I know of no better person than Michael Veazey, and I would encourage you to check out AmazingFBA.com/mentoring to learn more about your programs and how you could help people. Michael, is that cool that I just refer people to your expertise?
Yeah, sure. I've worked with people from raw beginners. I've worked with people who some guys doing a couple of £1 million a year in wholesale and wanting to transition into private label, or not so much transition in the immediate term as add private label products to the mix, and on the longer term transition. So I'm not generally working more and more with more established sellers. I do work with people at the early stages. The only thing I would say is that if you're really early stages and you don't have a lot of capital, then I wouldn't suggest you go into private label, or rather than half doing private labeling, half-assing, if I may use that word, a very British way of putting it, then you probably should be looking at doing replens and doing it really, really well. And in that case, obviously, the replens challenge is the place to go. And I know that you guys have got some amazing guests and have got some great expertise available these days. So that's the only caveat I would say, is pick a business model that's appropriate to your financial resources and your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks everybody for joining us on this episode of the E-commerce Leader. You can check it out on ecommerceleader.com for all the prior episodes, and on all the fun players, including Spotify, where we're the #1 e-commerce podcast when you use a hyphen between the E and the C. But it's an honor. The algorithm has rewarded us for our hard work on Spotify, and we're honored to be #1. So we'd love to have you check it out, give it a review, and rate on podcast listener player you use. And Mike, thank you again for a wonderful conversation.
Thanks, man.
And we're out. That's the end of our podcast.
Excellent.
Okay, cool. Awesome.
The only thing I'd say is that you'll catch it when you listen back, that your audio really got very distorted in the last bit when you were talking about leaving a review or a rating or whatever. So we would probably just have to cut that, I think.
Oh, so sad.
I didn't want to sort of say it live.
Well, if you're still listening to this episode with us, then thanks for hanging out with us today. We're going to wrap it up here, but it's an honor. For those of you who are in the 30-day replens challenge watching this live right now, Michael will be coming up in the next couple of weeks to do the cash conversion cycle training, which is going to be really powerful. So I'm looking forward to that, man. It's going to be a really, really good training. So.
Yeah, I'm quietly obsessed with that concept. So hopefully I can get across what I'm, the concept in a straightforward way. The trouble with numbers, hard to put across easily because you kind of lose yourself in numbers, but I will do my best to strip it right down and keep it as simple as possible.
Love it. All right, man. Great conversation. As always, have a wonderful evening there in London. I'm about to have an amazing Sunday here in Seattle.
Yeah, it's a beautiful day. Yeah, enjoy your weather.
See you, buddy.
Take care.